Why doesn't Russia launch large-scale missile attacks against Kyiv or other major cities like Iran did against Israel to weaken morale and infrastructure? Russia only has a limited number of missiles. Although it is constantly producing more, it also needs to maintain a certain stockpile if it wants to preserve its deterrence capability against NATO and individual NATO member states. The Russians have, I believe, the latest estimates were 600 Iskander missiles currently in stock. With that, of course, you could launch a major wave. The point, however, is that Iran had to launch large waves because most of the missiles were intercepted along the way. And the larger the wave, the more difficult it becomes, the lower the percentage of missiles that can usually be intercepted. I mean, a single missile might slip through the cracks, but it's obvious that 10 missiles are considerably easier to intercept than 100 missiles at the same time. Right now, on the Ukrainian side, Patriot missiles are in short supply, and at the same time, the number of Patriot batteries is not enough to cover the entire country. For example, just 2 days ago or so, there was a new attack. 2 Iskanders were used there. Both struck targets in Ukraine. There's simply no reason to fire 100 at once if I can get through with just 2. If I can get both through when I fire 2 and both make it, then there's the fact that the Iranians fired at cities because their missiles were probably too inaccurate, and it's better for them to target cities where they can cause damage than to try to hit some military base that they might end up missing. And where you can see on the radar that the missile misses the base by 600 meters, so the Israeli air defense doesn't even need to fire at all. In Tel Aviv, if you miss your target by 600 meters, you'll still hit some high-rise or some residential area. That means the shelling of cities, which, by the way, is clearly a war crime, just to be thorough about that. The shelling of urban areas, as carried out by Iran, made sense from the Iranian perspective as a way to retaliate, because relatively inaccurate missiles can still cause damage if the target is simply large enough. If I have a target with a diameter of several kilometers, then it doesn't really matter if my missile's accuracy is off by 1,000 meters. And that's the reason there. The reason the Russians don't do this is first because their missiles are actually significantly more accurate. Second, because far fewer of their missiles are intercepted. And third, terrorism against cities hasn't really had a successful track record in the past to make it worthwhile. That means, from the Russian side, there's little strategic sense in trying to carry out terror bombings of cities. One could argue that the effect is actually much greater if you do it every day, because a massive bombardment with 100 missiles now on Kyiv, or with 200 missiles, of which 195 or 190 actually get through, would of course make a big impression. But then the Russians would have to refrain from further attacks for weeks or even months, whereas if they fire every day, they wear down the residents of Kyiv. The residents of Kyiv, for the most part, no longer go to their air raid shelters because they are attacked every night. I mean, at some point, I just want to sleep in my own bed. If I realize that there are attacks every night, then I have the choice. Either I run to the subway every night and sleep there on the cold floor in a sleeping bag, or I sleep in my own bed and just shrug my shoulders and say, if it gets me, then it gets me. That means the lasting effect from the daily shelling, the constant attrition, is much greater there. Because if it happens often enough, after the 200th night of attacks, when the house next door was hit and the house across the street and you've lost a friend or two, then you might slowly start to consider whether you should pack your bags and get yourself to safety by going abroad. And in doing so, you end up fulfilling the Russian objective, to undermine Ukraine's ability to generate tax revenue, retain its workforce, and keep potential soldiers. All of that is destroyed by driving people abroad. During individual large-scale attacks, everyone runs into the bunker, everyone runs into the air raid shelter, then the rockets hit, and afterwards they come back out and continue living their lives. That means you could argue that these smaller, repeated attacks might even have a greater effect in terms of strategic objectives. Because if I can't spend a single night without an air raid alarm, at some point I'm going to lose my patience. Whereas running to the air raid shelter once every 6 months, well, my God, then I'll just do it. And with a bit of luck, my apartment will still be there afterwards.